Darkcast Network, indie pods with a dark side.
Ho, ho, holy shit, it's almost 2024. Christmas is less than a week away, and life is chaos. So we're working on another case to present to you before the end of the year, but we're going to take a little bit of a break to spend some of the holiday with our families. Or in my case, I'm going to hole away and play House Flipper 2 to gain some sanity back. But you know, whatever.
I'll be playing The Sims or City Skylines too. So 100% relate to that. So this week, we're doing something a little bit different. We're going to share with you some of our favorite episodes from the past year. You know, our own version of Wrapped, so to speak.
First up is a case that my mom brought to my attention and had me watch Explore With Us's YouTube video on it. After I watched that video the first time, I knew we had to talk about it. And Gina, I made sure you had no idea what was going on so you could experience the thoughts and feelings that I had in real time. So here's a preview from our episode about Ryan Waller and Heather Kwan. I don't even know where to begin with today's case. I lost count how many times I said, "What the actual fuck?" while going over this story. Shout out to my mom for suggesting this one and sending me spiraling down the rabbit hole.
If you, dear listener, want to suggest a future case for us to cover or express your outrage at the craziness you're about to hear, join our group on Facebook, Weird True Crime Podcast Group. Now, before we begin, I actually know nothing of this case and haven't seen or heard anything about it per Amber's
Demand?
Demand, yeah, that's the word we're looking for. Yeah, Amber told me I absolutely could not even Google this. So we will be learning about this case together. Yeah.
To be fair, I did give you the option. And when you were like, meh, I was like, okay, fine, no, don't do it. Just don't.
It's like, do I want to look this up? And you were like, actually, no, don't.
Just don't. Just you can. I get to experience firsthand watching your reactions of this unfold, because when my mom showed this video to me, I was by myself laying in a hotel bed watching it on my phone and had nobody to experience the outrage with. So this'll be
well,
good.
I'm glad I can entertain you today. So let's go. 21-year-old Heather Kwan was found deceased on the couch. Ryan was there, alive, with a huge black and blue bruise on his left eye and some dried blood on his face. Ooh. He was immediately apprehended as a suspect, with the police thinking that there had been some sort of domestic dispute that resulted in her death. Ryan waited in the back of the police car while the police processed the scene. After waiting for 4 hours in the back of the police car, he was taken to the station where a lengthy interrogation began, starting roughly around 5 o'clock in the morning. At the beginning of the interrogation video, you can see Ryan enter the room wearing a white jumpsuit, assuming the police took his clothing in as evidence and gave him the poofy suit to wear. Ryan sits on the chair with his back to the wall, knees up to his chest, and bare feet on the edge of the chair. Every now and then, he raises his right arm and rests his head against it. As mentioned before, Ryan has a severely bruised eye. It is very dark and swollen. Honestly, side note, from just like the still shot I can see of the interrogation video that I have not watched, it almost looks fake. It's so dark. Like, it looks like a mask that was drawn onto his eye. So it's crazy that it's so dark. About 5 minutes into waiting, he adjusts his position in the chair and leans forward with his head resting on his arms on the table. He continues to fidget and move around as if he can't get comfortable. The way he moves around sometimes makes it seem like his head is hurting him, but with the size of the bruise on his eye, it would be a surprise if he didn't have a headache, honestly. Yeah, or like a concussion. A few more minutes pass and still no one enters the room. All the while, Ryan is still fidgeting and can be heard moaning softly here and there. He just can't seem to stay still longer than a few moments before he changes positions or shuffles his feet.
It's hard to hear what is said, but they have Ryan pick up his feet and place them on the table so they can take photographs of the soles of his feet.
What?
He stays in this position while they snap the photos, and he tells the interrogator that he just wants to go to sleep. The lead detective on the case, Paul Dalton, responds that it'll happen sooner or later. When they're done taking pictures, Ryan asks if he can go home. And it's very important to remember what is said here.
Okay. Oh, here we go.
Do I get to go home?
I don't know. Should go to the doctor's. Where you should go.
Me?
Yeah.
Why? That?
Yeah.
Is it bad?
I'd say that's really bad.
He doesn't realize how bad he's hurt?
He doesn't realize how bad it is, and interrogator saying, "Yeah, dude, you probably should go to the hospital and get that checked out."
Yeah, I would say so. That looks like it could even need surgery or something. It's so dark and swollen.
There were photos of Ryan's face, the second one, it's blurred out. It's a police photo they took of him when they apprehended him. And I found the uncensored version below that. So you were telling me you take those pictures of this poor boy and you don't immediately think, is that a fucking bullet wound on his nose?
It looks like a bullet wound.
Yeah. So that's
I know nothing about guns, and I can tell you that that's a fucking bullet wound. Sorry to interrupt you. I'm just
No, but yeah, I was blown away when I found that uncensored. I mean, the uncensored picture is not for the faint of heart. I got the censored version for us to be able to share, but I wanted you to be able to see the uncensored. That is legitimately a fucking bullet wound through his nose. And they were saying, yeah, it looks like an entry and exit. And then if you scroll down, there's another picture, the side. Yeah. There's that dark part above his ear. That's another exit wound. The fucking bullet went through his goddamn eye.
It feels like the detective, Dalton, intentionally ignored what he was seeing.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the time, whenever you have a girlfriend dead, boyfriend's there, it's the husband did it. It's always the husband. It's always the spouse or, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the time, yeah, that's a good MO. But be sure first.
Maybe look at how the person, I don't even want to say suspect, look at how the person is acting.
In Ryan's case, just look at his fucking nose.
Seriously.
He got shot. Okay, even if he was still a suspect, he still got shot. You want to treat. You treat the medical injuries before you interrogate a suspect.
100%. It doesn't matter who you are, what you did. You should still, make an effort to help somebody before questioning them for hours.
Yeah.
Especially if he's like, I don't even know what happened to me, and his story keeps changing and he seems confused as fuck.
The slurring when he's talking, he can't
it's obvious maybe he has a brain injury.
I hate playing this role, but playing devil's advocate, how would somebody be shot in the face be sitting there talking? So of course you're not going to believe that. And he could be drunk, maybe that's why he's acting like that. Like,
so then take a blood test, do an alcohol test, do something.
Exactly. People trying to defend the Phoenix Police Department and Dalton, like saying, well, he doesn't know his baseline of how he's supposed to be. He doesn't understand, he doesn't know
That's nobody's baseline.
No. Well, I mean, if you're on meth a lot, that could be, but
yeah. But that's the thing. Do a drug test then.
It goes back to the medical treatment first.
Yes. Which involves seeing if they have any sort of substance in their system that might be impacting the way they're acting. Or, a bullet in your head, because
checking a bullet wound. Yeah.
Oh, you see that? Like, he's a fucking cop. Wouldn't he know what a bullet wound looked like? Haven't they been trained on any of this? Obviously not, which don't even get me started on my whole feelings about, like, people that are in the middle of a mental health crisis and the cops being called. Don't even get me started on that. But this is blatant ignorance. Negligence, just ignoring what's right in front of your face because you want to get a win. And you want this guy to tell you, oh, yeah, I did it, or whatever. Mm-hmm. That's all you're trying to accomplish here. No matter what the cost is to this, poor guy who's obviously injured.
Thankfully, in the end, the people ultimately responsible for the death of Heather Kwan and the attempted murder of Ryan Waller were held accountable. Still does not change the fact that Ryan endured an unspeakable hell while in police custody. If you take a look at the photos of Ryan's face the police took, it is very apparent there are gunshot wounds on his face.
Mm-hmm.
Regardless of suspicion of guilt, medical treatment should have been rendered immediately before he was forced to sit in a police cruiser for 4 hours. I spiraled down the rabbit hole with this story too, so tell me, what do you think?
What a fucking mess. That's what I think. This is just like beyond negligent and awful. And I feel so sorry for both of their families. And can I just say, like, they look so happy and sweet in their pictures.
Mm-hmm.
Just two young people living their lives, minding their own business on Christmas.
Ryan had recently just graduated high school and Heather was attending college when this happened.
That breaks my heart. I hope that they can find the justice that they very much deserve.
Don is still very much active. He's actually, he's still trying to get exposure, still trying to get people talking about it. He's still trying to fight the city of Phoenix.
Mm-hmm.
He even said on his Facebook that there had been people talking to him about possibly picking up to do a movie about Heather and Ryan's story. So that would be interesting to see if that happens.
I hope it does and that they do it the right way.
Yeah.
And they don't sensationalize it. It doesn't need any more sensationalizing.
No, it's already
horrible. But that story deserves to be told and shared and for everyone to hear it. Yeah. Yep. So listen, share this, tell the story because holy shit, that's awful.
It is such a shocking story. I still can't believe how the police handled everything. And I can only hope that Ryan's family will get some sort of justice someday. Because to be perfectly honest, when I watched the video for the first time, I was almost on the police's side. Like, what is wrong with this guy? What the hell is happening?
Mm-hmm.
But then afterwards, and you see the pictures, clearly see those pictures. It's like, what the fuck were they thinking within 30 seconds of laying eyes on this guy? It's heartbreaking.
100%. It's really hard to believe that the officer didn't realize that Ryan was suffering and continued to interrogate him for hours while he had a serious head injury. Because like you said, just looking at him, you can tell that something's going on there. So it's very surprising to me that they didn't have him evaluated before interrogating him for that long. And honestly, the case is just so sad. And I hope the officers involved were reprimanded for the way that it was handled, because that's just unforgivable. On a lighter note, the first episode that I want to highlight is our Rent a Hitman episode. I heard about Rent a Hitman on one of my favorite podcasts, That's Spooky, and I knew we needed to do a deep dive. This one is like Dumb Criminals on steroids.
I don't know about you, but I could use something a little more lighthearted after the emotional wreckage caused by our last two episodes. However, if you haven't listened to the 2-part interview with John Palmer, please check it out and share it with as many people as possible. John has spent the last 3 years advocating for his wife, Katie, after she was hit and killed during their morning walk in April of 2020.
John is honestly one of the kindest people we've met, and we want to help Katie's story gain as much attention as possible. So please help us share her case. But in weird true crime fashion, it's time to mix it up with another What the Fuck Wednesday. We've wanted to cover today's topic for quite some time, and I am so excited to get into it. So we've just spent the last 20 minutes trying to figure out how the hell this topic came up. But for some reason, we've been wondering about contract killing. Probably in passing conversation about a case or something, but naturally it led us to wondering about the history of Hitman and contract killing.
Totally normal things to be thinking about. Jesus. Okay.
I mean, in this realm, yes.
Yeah, in our little corner of chaos, it's completely normal. But, you know, I know like next to nothing about contract killing other than whatever is depicted in like movies and whatnot. But what I do know is that most of the contract killings are over like financial gains, like a life insurance policy or something. And with hiring a third party to carry out the task, it makes it harder for the investigators to really put the case together.
Right. According to an Australian Crime Institute study done of 162 contract murders and attempted contract murders in Australia between the years of 1989 and 2002, the most common reason for hiring a hitman was, as you said, insurance payouts.
Hey, I saw that study. It also said that the payout for each murder ranged in price from $5,000 to like $30,000 with an average of about $15,000. And guess what the typical weapon of choice was?
I mean, if I were a contract killer, I would probably go with something that wasn't super obvious, but I'm guessing that's not the answer.
It was a pew-pew.
Mm-hmm.
Guns. I mean, you know, you think about movies and stuff, you've always got this dude on top of a frickin' rooftop building with a sniper rifle.
A silencer. Yeah.
Silencer, exactly. Back during the 1920s, there were two brothers who worked as gunmen for none other than Al Capone. What were these men's names, you may ask? Fiore and Frank Buccieri.
Yeah.
Gasp of shock.
Yeah. I mean, it's true. Fiore and Frank were, in fact, my dear, dear uncles. Growing up, I bragged about having uncles with ties to Al Capone. Needless to say, kids don't pick on you much if you say you have mob ties. So it definitely worked in my favor. Fiore, nicknamed Fifi, and Frank began as gunmen for Al Capone in the 1920s, like Amber said. Fifi rose to top enforcer and lead hitman for Sam Momo Giancana in the 1960s. He was also part of the infamous torture and slaying of loan shark William Action Jackson when the gang believed he was actually an informant for the FBI. Jackson was hung on a meat hook and tortured with ice picks, baseball bats, a blowtorch, and an electric cattle prod, and died 3 days later. Turns out, he wasn't an informant after all. The FBI dubbed him the Lord High Executioner in 1966. My big bad uncle died from cancer in 1973. Obviously, I never met the man, but it's kind of cool and terrifying to know I have ties to the Italian mob.
Yeah, so moral of the story here, don't mess with the Gina.
No, that explains my Italian, anger and personality quite a bit.
Oh, no, it explains a lot. However, I do want to point out, this big shot gunman for Al Capone was nicknamed Fifi.
I know.
You know what I think of whenever I see the name Fifi?
Like a poodle.
Like a fucking fluffy poodle, exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, God. I wonder how many people he bitch slapped because they made fun of him like that. Or they probably didn't make fun of him because he would bitch slap them. Anyway.
Yeah, no.
Believe it or not, contract killing is still a thing in today's society. And going down this whole rabbit hole, it led us to a few very recent cases involving murder for hire. What's that? You want us to go over some of them? Well, if you insist.
Let's travel to Miami, Florida in July of this year. Yes, 2023, where 18-year-old Jasmine Paez found herself in a little bit of a predicament. A single mom, Jasmine had been dating a guy for a while until he broke things off with her because she had a kid. It's understandable that a young guy like that might not be ready to settle down with someone who has a child. What's not understandable is the fact that this dude told her to get rid of her kid and he would get back together with her. Jasmine turned to Google to help find the answer for her troubles, and she stumbled onto rentahitman.com. Not wanting to be identified, Jasmine used a fake name to fill out the web form, uploaded a picture of her 3-year-old son, 3 years old, and provided his address and the date she would like to have him taken out. It wasn't long before she received a text message from one of the hired guns who sealed the deal for a whopping $3,000. That's gross. She then texted her ex-boyfriend that it's being taken care of, it being her living, breathing 3-year-old child. The nerve.
Ew. Well, what Jasmine didn't realize was that the hired gun she so eagerly talked to about killing her own child was actually a detective with the Miami-Dade Police Department. She was arrested that same evening and released a couple of days later on a $15,000 bail and told to stay away from the little boy.
Rightfully so.
Thankfully for small miracles.
Yes.
Jasmine was charged with solicitation of murder in the first degree and unlawful use of a communication device. Her court date is on August 17th. We're recording this on the 14th, so just a few days from now. And she's pleaded not guilty. So let's back it up a little bit here. How did this lovesick 18-year-old who filled out a murder for hire form online get caught? Well, rentahitman.com isn't really a website where anyone can request to take out their annoying spouse, coworker, or kid in this case. It's actually a website that was created by Bob Inez in 2005 as a cybersecurity company. Unfortunately, the firm fell apart, but Inez kept the domain running and didn't really think much about it for the next few years.
The name Rent a Hitman is actually a play on words. The company offered several services, including the testing of a company's online security measures by carrying out hits on them, or to optimize web traffic by maximizing the number of hits the site received. For some reason, Inez felt compelled to check the email inbox associated with the website in 2008, and that's when he found hundreds of emails from people requesting services from contract killers or looking for employment. Luckily, all of the emails were in jest, and he didn't find any of them to be alarming. But this was not the case when he checked the inbox again in 2010. He found an email from a woman named Helen who had lost her passport and was stranded in Canada. She claimed that 3 of her family members had screwed her out of her father's inheritance and she wanted them dead. Inez originally ignored the email, but she followed up with another message listing their names, home addresses, and other information. It was at this point that he started taking her messages more seriously and decided to follow up.
Inez responded to Helen's email under the pseudonym Guido Finelli, asking if she still required assistance and wanted to be in touch with a field operative. Within a few hours, he had received her legal name, location, and phone number. He turned her into the authorities and soon discovered that Helen was wanted in the UK for more serious charges.
What could be more serious?
Questions?
Yeah.
The woman was held in prison for 4 months before she was extradited to the UK for her other warrants. After potentially saving the lives of 3 people, Inez realized his little forgotten website could catch wannabe criminals. He edited the website's homepage to include jokes and clues to show it wasn't an actual murder-for-hire site. The tagline boasts it as a, quote, point-and-click solution, end quote, and states that it is 100% HIPAA compliant. HIPAA is an acronym for the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act of 1996, which is the federal law that requires the creation of national standards to protect sensitive health information from being disclosed without the patient's consent. Well, I mean, that's the normal acronym.
HIPAA, yeah.
In the case of the website, however, HIPAA stands for the Hitman Information Privacy and Protection Act of 1964. There's also a warning message on the homepage that reads,
quote, "It's common knowledge that the dark and deep webs are not safe marketplaces for carrying out nefarious deeds. These sites are often fraught with potential risks, including viruses, and fraud is rampant. There's no guarantee of privacy, and your information could be leaked to less than reputable websites, including law enforcement agencies. And that's no fun." The good news is that Rent a Hitman is a safe and secure option that's easily accessible on the World Wide Web. We place great importance on maintaining the confidentiality of our clients and ensuring their privacy is protected under HIPAA, the Hitman Information Privacy and Protection Act of 1964. In contrast, our competitors' websites can't make the same claim, and their credibility is questionable at best. So when it comes to your safety and peace of mind, choose Rent a Hitman, end quote.
I had to include a What the Fuck Wednesday episode as well. This one is one that I really enjoyed researching and writing, and it was the first we did of this particular style of episode as well. You know, the beginning story with the funny stuff afterwards. Our Tales from the Morgue episode gave us the crazy story about the Biological Resource Center and some freaking hilarious stories from morgue workers from Reddit. Here's that clip. I think back when we did our episode covering Brandon Lee in The Crow, I mentioned the quote, "Childhood's over the moment you know you're going to die." That quote really stuck with me. No one gets out of this life alive, and sooner or later, we're all going to end up, well, dead. Now that I'm older and have children, I have to think about the sort of things like what my wishes are when I pass. Cremation? Burial? Donate to science? Not gonna lie, that last one sounds intriguing. What about you, G?
So I used to be really interested in the idea of donating my body to a body farm. Lay me in a field and let the next generation study me as I waste away. Though I'd also be fine with maybe a tree or mushroom pod burial. Something less harmful to the earth than filling me with chemicals and sticking me underground so all those toxins can seep into the soil. No, thank you.
Oh, yes. The tree burial is very neat, but also the body farm. You may be onto something there. Well, regardless of what path we choose, typically we end up at a morgue before our final resting place, wherever that may be. On today's What the Fluff Wednesday, we're going to be talking about quite an interesting array of morgue-related stories. Oh yeah! Before we go down the morgue rabbit hole, remember how I said that donating my body to science or something when I die sounds pretty neat?
Yeah, I vaguely remembered that from about 3 minutes ago. Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, I might have changed my mind already.
That was really fast.
Look, I am who I am, and I really don't want my head sewn onto someone else's body.
Oh, dear God. Are you talking about the Biological Resource Center in Arizona?
That's the one. The Biological Resource Center was located in Phoenix, Arizona, and owned by Stephen Gore. If that's not an appropriate name, I don't know what is.
Yeah, he lucked out with that one.
Now, we say was because it was permanently closed in 2014 after the FBI raided the facility.
The center was a for-profit business that assisted people with donating their bodies to science. According to court records, from 2005 to 2014, when it was shut down, BRC received about 5,000 human bodies and distributed more than 20,000 body parts. They also sold body parts to the U.S. Army contractors for military experiments. Unfortunately, it was, quote, under false pretenses, end quote, as the Army had been told the families had given consent, but in reality, they had no idea.
For example, Doris Stauffer passed away at the age of 74 after being cared for by her son, Jim. Her descent into dementia prompted him to consent to donate her brain to science, hoping that it may in some way aid in the research for finding a cure for Alzheimer's one day. At the recommendation of a nurse, he contracted the BRC and signed a consent form authorizing medical research on his mother's body. He made sure to check the box prohibiting military, traffic safety, and other non-medical experiments. None of those things would aid in Alzheimer's research. About a week and a half after Doris's body was picked up, Jim received her cremated remains, but he wasn't told how her body was used. Unfortunately, it was later discovered that her body became part of an Army experiment to measure the damage caused by roadside bombs.
Army officials stated that they relied on assurances from the BRC that the families had agreed to let the bodies be used in such a manner, and that they had never received consent forms that the donors or the families had signed. Records from the BRC, as well as military records, showed that at least 20 other bodies were used in the experiments without the donor or donor's family's permission. In Doris's case, BRC workers had detached one of her hands for cremation to send back to her son before selling her body to a taxpayer-funded research project for the U.S. Army. Ultimately, Jim didn't even learn of his mother's body's fate from an apology from the BRC or even from the Army, but rather from a Reuters reporter. Also, side note, if all they did was cut off her hand, cremate it, and give it back to him, wouldn't that be a very small amount of ashes?
Yeah, but I guess it would just depend on how the rest of her body was used, because he did consent to let her body be used for experiments, for medical experiments. So there's...
Okay. So maybe he knew he wasn't going to get her all back.
I can't imagine how incredibly dejecting it is to try to do something good, only to learn that your wish was not honored, and your loved one's body wasn't even treated with the respect expected through a company you had put your trust in. The body brokering business is not illegal, but it is also quite different from the rules and regulations of organ transplanting as well as cadaver donation to help repair joints or other parts of the body. Those are programs designed to extend or enrich the lives of the living and are heavily regulated by U.S. law. Buying and selling of bodies not used for transplant reasons are not regulated by laws, and it is perfectly legal to sell a whole body or parts of a body for research or education. Maybe one day there will be more regulation.
Honestly, we can only hope. Hey, didn't you mention something about having your head sewn on to a different body?
Yes. What we talked about is only the tip of the iceberg of the issues the BRC had while in operation. Back in January 2014, the FBI raided the Biological Resource Center and made several horrific discoveries. According to court documents, the agents encountered, quote, various unsettling scenes, end quote. Mark Quinner gave a testimony describing what he had seen, comparing it all to a, quote, morbid joke, end quote. Some of the sights he described were a bucket of heads, arms, and legs, a cooler filled with male genitalia, a woman's head sewn onto a larger male torso, like Frankenstein, hanging on a wall, infected heads, although it's not quite clear what that actually means. Bodies had been cut up with chainsaws and bandsaws, none of which with ID tags, and pools of human blood and other bodily fluids on the freezer floor.
Why the hell the facility would store the body parts like that and treat them in such a way is a mystery. The FBI raided BRC after it was accused of selling the donated body parts for profit, as mentioned earlier. According to court documents, the most expensive item the facility sold was a whole body with no shoulders or head for a whopping $2,900. A foot went for about $450. In 2015, Stephen Gore, the aforementioned owner with the fantastic name, pleaded guilty to operating an illegal enterprise and was sentenced to 1 year deferred prison time and 4 years probation. 10 of 21 different plaintiffs were rewarded $58 million by a jury in a lawsuit against Stephen Gore. Supposedly, the 11 who were not awarded anything did not testify at the trial. A woman whose husband passed from cancer had donated his body, but revealed during her testimony that she wouldn't have if she had known his remains would be sold for profit. Doubts rose among the families about whether or not the cremated remains they received were really even their loved ones or not.
What an absolute nightmare to have to endure. Maybe I will just stick with good old-fashioned burial or cremation. I mean, I'll be dead, so I won't really care, but I don't want my family to have to go through any of that.
Well, before we move on to the morgue stories, just a fair warning. Some of them are a little darker, but still with a touch of humor.
Our first story comes from Reddit. Quote, I'm a nurse now, but I was an autopsy tech before I got into nursing school. This one case was a 400-pound man who died of a heroin overdose. The standard operating procedure for the medical examiner is to examine the lividity. When you die, your blood pools and discolors your skin a deep red/purple. It's an indicator of the time of death and position of the body. So I call the orderly to help hold the guy over, and once we're ready, I positioned myself so that I could push his shoulders and hips to help him roll. We give the old heave-o and get the body on its side. At which time, the fart that had been fermenting in the guy's colon for a week unleashed itself a mere 6 inches from my nose. It was the most putrid, bombastic, and permeating fart I've ever been a part of. It had to have lasted a minute at least, and the smell could gag a maggot. I couldn't let the body drop since the ME was doing his thing, but the orderly is laughing his ass off at me, and let's go. I'm now holding 400 pounds of dead weight as it expels its wrench-bending air blast at me. How I didn't puke is nothing short of a miracle, end quote.
Well, that sounds like a really good reason to quit your job. But also, has that guy ever smelled protein farts? I'm just saying. Like, you don't want to be surrounded by dudes who drink a lot of protein shakes and then fart, okay? It might be up there. I'm just throwing it out there.
It's not okay.
And either way, he is a true hero for continuing his work after experiencing something like that, because I would have gotten the hell out.
I would have been the orderly. Dying laughing.
We're like, fuck this.
But I think the part that made me laugh the most was his too long didn't read. Quote, holding a body on its side, it unleashed a fart that could knock a buzzard off a shit wagon directly at my nose, end quote.
That definitely sounds like an Amberism, so I can understand.
Amberisms. Can we get a list of those going?
Yes.
I think that'd be amazing. A big thank you to all first responders and medical staff. I really just don't know how you do it sometimes.
No. Morgue Stories is one of my favorites from the past year as well. And yes, thank you to everyone who dedicates their lives to helping the living or the dead. Last, but certainly not least, the second case I would like to highlight is the horrendous case of Fan Man Yi, the Hello Kitty murder. At one point or another in our lives, we all experience a nightmare while sleeping. Sometimes they're surreal and uncomfortable, and then there are other times where they're just downright terrifying. But what if you had a nightmare that you couldn't wake up from? Not because you were paralyzed with fear, but because you weren't even asleep.
The nightmare 23-year-old Fan Man Yi endured before her death is nothing short of horrific and tragic. Today, we are going to talk about the truly terrifying case known as the Hello Kitty murder. Fan Man Yi did not have an easy childhood. After being abandoned by her parents at a young age, she lived in an all-girls home. Due to age restrictions at the orphanage, she was forced to leave when she turned 15. With nowhere to go, Fan was homeless and pressured into sex work to make some sort of income. Unsurprisingly, this life on the streets exposed her to drugs, to which she quickly became addicted. She kept this up for several years until she turned 21, when she took up residence in Romance Villa, a brothel in the Shengshui Po district in Hong Kong. It was at this brothel that she gained a new client, a man by the name of Ying Chi-yun. Ying was also a drug addict, and it wasn't long before the pair fell in love. In 1997, they got married and had a little boy. As you can imagine, two drug addicts with an infant don't make for a great home life.
No.
Neighbors complained of hearing loud fights through the walls of the couple's home, and there are some stories that describe Ying as abusive. Fan eventually left her husband in 1998, stopped using drugs, and got a hostess job at the Empress Karaoke Club. Her goal of turning her life around for herself and her young son looked promising. That is, until she met 34-year-old socialite Chan Man Lok, who was a regular at the nightclub. Chan Man Lok was not the person Fan needed to meet at this point in her life. He was a drug addict, pimp, and a member of the Wo triad.
It's time for a little history lesson. Triads made their first appearance as early as 1647 when they took part in the effort to overthrow the Manchu rulers of China. Officials hoped for their disbandment after the formation of the Republic in 1912, but the Triads had other plans. The group had gained a considerable amount of power and money due to their criminal activity. Political groups consistently turned to the Triads to help them fight their battles, from the nationalists versus the communists to both fighting against the Japanese. In the 1940s, the nationalists staged a large-scale initiation party recruiting thousands of police officers, soldiers, and even civil servants into the fold. During the Japanese invasion, the Triads aligned themselves with the Japanese and were given large amounts of money to act as de facto police force, carrying out punishments against citizens for the Japanese government. As thanks, the government let the Triads continue their criminal activities, which included controlling the black market and the opioid trades. One of these groups was the Wo triad, which is a group that originated in Hong Kong in the 1930s. Around the time of Fan Man Yi's kidnapping and subsequent torture, the Wo triad was at the center of an attack on the coast of Indonesia and the killing of a school teacher in 1995. They also split up into 6 heavily armed groups throughout Hong Kong during this time, preparing for more criminal activity across mainland China. The new man in Fan's life, Chan Man Lok, was a member of this group and had recently been charged with drug trafficking. Not exactly the type of person you want to meet when you're trying to get on the street and narrow.
Yeah, not so much. Fan had been trying to turn her life around. However, sources say that she was still having some drug issues, and getting familiar with Chan Man Lok meant she had unlimited access to drugs. He was also a pimp, so her sex work picked back up again as well. Unfortunately, as we know, drug addiction leads to some poor choices, and Fan decided to steal Chan Man Lok's wallet, which held roughly the equivalent to $500 in it. It didn't take long for Chan to realize she had stolen it, and he demanded that she repay the money she stole, plus interest for showing such disrespect. She was able to pay the original amount back immediately, but the steep $1,200 equivalent fee he was demanding on top of it was a different story. She needed more time to secure that money to give back to him.
But Chan Man Lok was not interested in waiting and was afraid Fan would take off without repaying him the money that he felt he was owed. What's a drug-dealing member of a triad supposed to do in this situation? Plan a kidnapping, of course. So he enlisted the help of 2 of his Wo triad buddies, 27-year-old Lung Xing Cho and 21-year-old Lung Wai Lun, to hunt Fan Man Yi down and kidnap her. On March 17th of 1999, Fan was abducted by the 3 men and a young girl who was referred to as Ah Fong. They took her to a flat at 31 Granville Road in Hong Kong. This place was absolutely disgusting and not suitable for anyone to live in. The walls and floors were filthy and trash littered the rooms. Unfortunately for Fan Man Yi, she would never step foot outside of this flat again. Chan wanted his interest repaid by Fan as soon as possible, so he decided that he was going to try to sell her to other men.
We won't sugarcoat it. She endured an unimaginable hell throughout the course of the month she was held. She was raped many times and beaten. They used metal bars, kitchen utensils, and even pieces of furniture. They forced her to consume human feces and urine. At one point, Chan went so far as to string her up from the ceiling and used her as a punching bag. Ah Fong, Chan's 14-year-old girlfriend, even described a time when Chan kicked Fan Man-yi in the head at least 50 times, and the young girl joined in thinking it was, quote, all in good fun, end quote. They would rub spices and chili oil in her wounds, and even burn her legs and feet with melted plastic to ensure she wasn't able to run away. Eventually, Fan was in no condition to be sold to other men, and they refused to pay too. So Chan decided to just continue torturing her. It was a game to them, and when they got bored with her, they would go into the next room and play video games, all allegedly while high on drugs. Throughout all of the beatings, rape, and torture, they forced Fan to smile and tell them that she enjoyed the beating. If she didn't, they would beat her even harder.
The human body is surprisingly resilient, but there is a limit to what can be endured. Chan, the young girl, and his henchmen left the apartment to get dinner on April 15th, 1999. As they often did, they locked Fan Man-yi in the bathroom so she couldn't get out while they were gone. When they returned several hours later, Ah Fong entered the bathroom, where she found Fan Man-yi dead. For some reason, the group was shocked by her death. I don't know if they expected to keep her tied up forever or that she would miraculously heal and return to sex work, but a person can only take so much physical abuse before the body just shuts down. Unable to make a decision on how to dispose of her body, they left to go play video games at an arcade. Eventually, after they came back, Chan stated to the group that, quote, she must be destroyed, end quote. She was placed in the bathtub, where they dismembered her body using a saw or kitchen knife. There are differing reports on this. Chan beheaded her while the others removed her flesh, bagged it, and placed the bags in the fridge. Because decomposition happens relatively quickly and they were in a densely populated area, they came up with a plan to prevent any detection of Fan's decomposing body. A bag with her intestines was given to Ah Fong, who was instructed to put them in hot water to prevent them from smelling. Over the course of the next 10 hours, Fan's dismembered body was boiled down to the bone so no decomposition could be detected. Sources say that during this time, the group got hungry, so while they were boiling Fan's head on one burner, they cooked noodles on another, even using the same spoon to stir both pots. That gross. The fact that you could just do that without batting an eye is so disturbing to me. By the time they were done, all that was left of Fan Man-yi that hadn't been thrown away was her skull, a single tooth, and some of her internal organs left in bags in the fridge.
Since she was an orphan, Fan didn't have any family members looking for her after her disappearance, other than her ex-husband and infant son. In May 1999, 14-year-old Ah Fong went to a Hong Kong police station and told them of the nightmares she had been having of a woman who had been bound by electrical wire and tortured to death. She claimed that the ghost of this woman was now haunting her, and the only way she could free herself from the ghost was to confess to the police what had happened. Who knows if she was really being haunted by the ghost of Fan Man-yi or if it was her guilty conscience catching up to her. Initially, investigators dismissed her story as a typical teenage delusional nightmare, but they decided to search the apartment where the girl said the crime had occurred anyway. During this search, they discovered a number of disturbing pieces of evidence to back up the teenager's story. The police found a large stuffed Hello Kitty mermaid doll in the apartment that appeared to have been opened and then sewn back up. When investigators reopened the doll, they discovered Fan Man Yi's skull inside. This discovery led to her death being known as the Hello Kitty murder.
This one is hard to listen to, but the unnecessary brutality and senseless loss of life definitely categorizes it as a weird true crime. As Amber said at the beginning, we are working on one more episode to be released before the end of the year, and if everything goes well, keep an eye out for it on December 27th.
If not, because, life, well, enjoy the holiday season with your friends and families, and get ready for more weird true crime in the new year.
We are so thankful that you found our little corner of chaos, and we look forward to being a platform for victims and their families to spread the word and get their voices heard.
Definitely. But there will also be more of the lighter side of weird true crime to come too, because comedy really is cheaper than therapy.
Yeah, for real. Until next time, stay safe.
And make good choices. Bye.
Bye.